clock is ticking, your paycheck is on the line, and you need to come up with one image that's going to sell your film. What are you going to do? Of all the lurid cover art competing for punter attention back in the VHS days, one title that always stood out amongst the myriad of others seeking that golden ratio of hulking evil men to scantily clad ladies was Doomed Megalopolis. In fact, I would argue that many people who never saw it and perhaps don't even know the title would still know the image of that eyeless, white-faced M. Bison lookalike with his manic toothy grin leering out over a darkened cityscape. For this installment of our occasional series on horror and anime, join us as we look at the show behind the face. We'll pay Doomed Megalopolis a visit and find out if it was a success story or just a successful bit of marketing. An adaptation of the acclaimed Teito Monogatari series of novels, and following a highly successful live-action film a couple of years prior, the plot spans a number of decades and doesn't fit easily into the anime's 4 episodes, but pull up a seat and I'll do my best to summarise it. In the early years of the 20th century, a ghostly army officer calling himself Yasunori Kato appears in Tokyo, seeking to obliterate Japan by bringing about the absolute destruction of its capital, at a time when those in power are trying to throw off their ancient superstitions to create a modern society of science and rationalism. Although Kato is an extremely powerful magician, he fails to wake the sleeping deity known as Masakado, whom he believes has the strength and the will to wipe Tokyo off the map. So instead he sets his sights on Yukari Tatsumiya, a young woman whom he believes has enough latent psychic power to trigger Masakado's rage. Set against a background of real-world events, such as the Great Kanto earthquake, each part then gives us a new snapshot of the struggle between Kato and those who would oppose him over the next 20 years, as Tokyo begins to develop into the megacity it will soon become, and with Kato resorting to ever-escalating measures to achieve his goal. At that level, it doesn't sound too complicated, but in practice, there are so many different groups in play, and so many unfamiliar concepts being thrown around in a short span of time, that it just made me feel like I was barking up the wrong tree. Of all the anime that we've looked at in this series so far, this is the one that feels the most inherently Japanese. Just less in an intriguing, exotic sense, and more in a way that made me constantly feel like I was missing something.
格闘技世界チャンピオンスパイダーマン
I even resorted to watching the dubbed version in the hope that Streamline would explain it to me like I'm 5, but I'm not sure that that really helped. Reading up on Doomed Megalopolis for making this video, I began to learn a little bit more about the story as it's told in the books, and things did begin to make a little more sense, but the significance of many scenes is still just outright lost on me. For example, early on in the story, Yukari's would-be suitor, the floppy-haired academic Naritaki, apparently has his body invaded by mischievous spirits from the offertory box, insulted by his meagre donation. This is pretty freaky and it looks really cool, but it's never mentioned again, and nor does it appear to affect Naritaki's character in any discernible way. Perhaps he's just Chekhov's cheapskate, I don't know. Most of the reviews of this one on YouTube are largely negative, so I was determined to give it as fair a shot as possible. Certainly what drew me to it is that it's a production from the renowned studio Madhouse during their golden era, and this is directed by Rintaro, a chameleon-like figure who's worked on just about every kind of anime you'd care to mention. Rintaro is probably best known to us in the West for his work on the film of Osamu Tezuka's Metropolis. It's diesel punk hellscapes picked out in rich expressionist overtones. His directing style is a little hard to pin down, but he's clearly in his element here, with Doomer Megalopolis providing plenty of impressively weird imagery to catch the eye. Interestingly, one of the first things the Wikipedia article mentions is that this adaptation was influenced by the success of ultra-violent erotic horror such as Urotsuki Doji. While that does seem likely, make no mistake, this isn't a sexy splatfest.
Like your mum.
Maybe it's not always successful, but this is the kind of horror based around a slow, mounting sense of unease. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if Rintaro was a big fan of Dario Argento, with creative use of colour and silhouettes lending the action a very surreal atmosphere. Even soundtrack has a whiff of Goblin about it. The first two episodes largely revolve around Kato battling the Sushi Mikado, a clan of government-sponsored mystics attempting to protect Yukari. Things do not go especially well for them, however, culminating in one of the series' most impressive sequences at the end of episode 1, where Kato destroys the protective barrier surrounding their compound by summoning a wave of Shikikami, small, familiar-like ghosts. Unfortunately, I never got into the story as much as the visuals. Even if you can get past the unfamiliar references to myth and theology, there are long stretches here which are just flat out boring, with the often identical characters trying fruitlessly to explain the plot. ANN gives one of the more positive reviews of the series, and they praise its characterization, but honestly I just can't see it. It's not a long series and it has a large cast of characters, none of whom we spend any great deal of time with. It just feels like everyone is here in service of the overall narrative, not to be studied as an individual. Even Kato himself proves surprisingly elusive. He's a powerful magician, able to run rings around the priests defending Yukari, but his origins and motivations are merely hinted at, never explained in enough detail that might give us a sense of him being this wicked force of evil we're repeatedly told that he is. He also doesn't look that threatening. The big, evil, Dracula-looking picture of him on the cover is the work of the late Noriyoshi Arai, a well-known painter of book covers and film posters, and a personal favourite of mine, but unfortunately, he doesn't seem to have had any influence over the look of the production beyond that. Anime Keso is more likely modelled on actor Kyosaku Shimada, who plays him in the live-action version and also voices him here. He is, however, such a lean, angular-looking fellow that you feel a stiff breeze could topple him at any moment. It's difficult to get a sense of menace off the guy when I feel like even I could take him in a pub fight. Strangely, the character I found far more troubling was Yoichiro, Yukari's brother with whom she's locked in an abusive, incestuous relationship. A part of me thinks the series might have been better served by just sticking to this. It's pretty damn creepy, suggesting that the repressed trauma of Yoichiro's actions is what has awakened Yukari's psychic potential. Heck, this even feels like the sort of thing Argento might have made a film about in the 80s. Unfortunately though, this remains a background subplot throughout the story and it never comes to any real fruition. Things do pick up into the third episode, however, with the introduction of Keiko, a shrine maiden whose entire life is devoted to worshipping Masakado. Remember him? Typically in anime, the shrine maiden is a demure and innocent figure, but Keiko is shrewd, capable, and probably the first person in the entire series who seems to pose Kato a genuine threat. She's the only character I really cared about. At the same time, the plot also bangs it up a notch as Kato kidnaps Yukari's daughter in a bid to sacrifice her to the spirits under Tokyo, aiming to cause an even greater earthquake that will finish the city for good. As Keiko fights alongside a Feng Shui expert and a man-shaped automaton to defeat Kato and rescue the girl, told you it was complicated. The story begins to look more like a conventional horror thriller and I found it a lot more entertaining. At the time, I did think this third episode would form the basis of a decent standalone film, and sure enough, the live-action version is largely based around this part of the story. The anime continues on for another episode, but I feel this is kind of unnecessary. To me, the meat of the story is clearly in this third part. I think this brings us to the question though of how you should judge a series like this one. If a film assumes knowledge of the source material and is aimed squarely at established fans, is that wrong? Unfortunately, the Teito Monogatari novels were never translated into English, so we don't readily have that option. Some say the live-action version is a better adaptation, but it's no easier to follow. Despite having seen the anime, I thought the first half hour of the live film was a blur. It attempts to summarise the events covered in two 40-minute anime episodes in less time than one. It is a good looking film, the special effects are particularly nice in that pre-CG way, but again, without reading around it, I'd barely know what was going on. Live action or anime, it's me on the outside looking in.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to add a very quick editor's note. It's come to our attention that prolific professional pervert H.R. Geiger himself actually produced conceptual character designs for the live action film. So, do with that information whatever you will, and we now return to our not even remotely regularly scheduled Alan.
If the anime were played purely as a thrill ride, this narrative complexity likely wouldn't be a problem. Yet, it seems to swing back and forward between genuinely impressive set pieces filled with bizarre, uncanny imagery, and long stretches of dull, self-important exposition before limping home to a kinda sorta conclusion that seems mainly to be there to stop people asking if they'll make any more. Of all the anime we've looked at in this series so far, this is the one that seems to demand the most serious narrative consideration, yet I can't quite bring myself to recommend it. Coming to it as a casual viewer, I don't think Doomed Megalopolis really works. Some films transcend cultural borders, others do not, and I fear that this falls firmly into the latter category. Even if I fully understood everything that was going on, it seems overlong and feels like it ends in the wrong place. Animation buffs and those heavily into Japanese mythology will still get something out of this, but for the rest of us, while the third episode is kinda neat, I think it's just too much investment of time for too little reward. Maybe if the novel series is ever translated, it'll all become clear, but until then, I think you might as well just buy an Ori print book and crouch under Bison when he does his torpedo so that you can hit him with a dragon punch.